What if the greatest strategic blunder of World War II wasn't a tactical oversight, but a profound failure of imagination?
Picture the formidable German Wehrmacht at the zenith of its power. An army synonymous with groundbreaking blitzkrieg tactics, meticulously engineered panzer divisions, and an unwavering belief in overwhelming, concentrated force. Within their smoke-laden command centers, steeped in the doctrine of Schwerpunkt, the strategic focus on sheer mass and destructive capability, intelligence reports detailing a new, compact American vehicle were met not with concern, but with outright derision. Generals, accustomed to the roaring might of their Tiger tanks, scoffed at this unarmored, angular contraption. They dismissed it as a mere toy, more suited for muddy farm fields than the brutal realities of modern warfare. This wasn't just casual laughter. It was a deeply ingrained cultural and strategic blindness, a catastrophic underestimation that would soon echo across every front. But history, as we know, often has a peculiar sense of irony. While German strategists meticulously planned their next grand offensives, prioritizing sheer, tonnage, and firepower, this unassuming American creation was quietly disrupting every preconceived notion of battlefield mobility. Even Allied soldiers, initially encountering these bouncing, almost recklessly agile machines on muddy British training grounds, harbored their own blend of skepticism and amusement. Could this visually insignificant contraption truly withstand the brutality of the front lines? Could something so seemingly fragile redefine warfare itself? Before we delve deeper into how this remarkable machine not only survived but thrived, transforming into an indispensable legend, take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share your initial thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe was the most underestimated piece of military hardware in history? This wasn't merely the introduction of a new vehicle. It was the genesis of a revolutionary operational philosophy that would fundamentally reshape modern conflict. The Jeep, in its stark simplicity, subtly unveiled a truth the Wehrmacht failed to grasp. Future warfare would not be won solely by concentrated brute force or the thickest armor. Instead, victory would pivot on a potent, dynamic combination of unparalleled speed, extreme adaptability across any terrain, and the sheer, overwhelming numerical superiority that only American industrial might could deliver. This compact, angular form, once met with dismissive chuckles, was destined to become the very embodiment of ubiquitous mobility, a relentless, omnipresent force that stitched together vast front lines, delivered critical lifelines, and confounded an enemy obsessed with traditional measures of power. From an object of derision, the Jeep was on the cusp of becoming an enduring legend, changing the game one flexible, nimble mile at a time. The unfolding conflict, surprisingly, commenced not with a bang, but with a dismissive chuckle. Within the smoke-laden command centers of occupied Europe, German generals casually derided intelligence reports, detailing an unusual American innovation. They openly scoffed at a compact, angular vehicle, noting its narrow wheels and conspicuous lack of the imposing mass they equated with military prowess. To them, it seemed more suited for rural transport on market days than as an instrument of modern warfare. Their officers quipped that if the Americans deployed such rudimentary contraptions, they might as well send bicycles and wheelbarrows. Yet, concealed beneath this veneer of condescension, no one could truly grasp how rapidly this unassuming machine would evolve to relentlessly challenge their every operational maneuver. Picture the scene: formidable columns of German panzer tanks rumbling along French highways, their engines roaring, their generals exuding confidence in their steel behemoths. Now, juxtapose this with the initial arrival of Jeeps in Britain. Diminutive forms, bouncing across muddy fields, soldiers clinging on, marveling at their reckless agility, even chuckling at the sheer audacity of such a vehicle. Initially, even Allied soldiers harbored skepticism, questioning whether such a seemingly fragile device could truly withstand the brutal realities of the front lines. However, this laughter, born of initial disbelief, was destined to be short. More than just an assembly of metal and wheels, the Jeep embodied a transformative operational philosophy. It subtly unveiled a truth that Germans had yet to comprehend. Future warfare would not be won solely by sheer weight and brute force, but by a potent combination of speed, unparalleled adaptability, and overwhelming numerical superiority. Thus, In the looming shadow of formidable tanks and bombers, this peculiar little machine began its transformative journey from an object of derision to an enduring legend. The narrative of the Jeep, however, did not originate on the battlefields, but within the austere bureaucratic corridors of Washington. In 1940, as Europe was engulfed in the inferno of war and America still deliberated its involvement, the U.S. Army issued a desperate, urgent appeal: design a lightweight reconnaissance vehicle to supersede the unwieldy motorcycles and sidecars then in use. This new machine needed to be rugged enough to endure the rigors of combat, yet agile enough to navigate any terrain. The specifications were astonishingly demanding, almost seemingly impossible. It had to weigh under 1,300 pounds, feature four-wheel drive, accommodate 3 personnel, possess a foldable windshield, and be capable of climbing steep gradients. Companies were allotted a mere 90 days to submit a prototype, an unprecedented time frame to engineer something entirely novel. 3 firms rose to this formidable challenge: American Bantam, Willys Overland, and Ford. American Bantam, a smaller company based in Pennsylvania, astounded the Army by delivering its prototype, the Bantam reconnaissance car, in an astonishing 49 days. Soldiers rigorously tested it in mud and rain, fording rivers and scaling hillsides impassable by motorcycles, and were thoroughly impressed. However, Bantam's production capacity was simply too limited for the massive scale required by the impending war effort. Soon, Willys Overland and Ford joined the fray, each refining the initial design. The Willys Quad, boasting its robust Go Devil engine, demonstrated superior performance, while Ford's version introduced significant practical improvements. Ultimately, a true collaboration emerged, merging the best aspects of all 3 designs. The standardized Jeep was born, a synthesis of Bantam's groundbreaking ingenuity, Willys' formidable power, and Ford's efficient manufacturing adaptations. During the testing phase, a collection of amusing anecdotes began to circulate among the troops. Young officers would surreptitiously take the prototypes for joyrides around the base, organize impromptu races at night, and even mischievously tow them into mess halls. One sergeant reportedly penned that he had never witnessed generals laugh so heartily as when they rode shotgun in these peculiar new vehicles. Even before its deployment overseas, the Jeep seemed to exude an aura of playful irreverence and unbridled freedom. Yet, its creation was far from a mere source of amusement. Behind every weld and beneath every engine roar lay a profound sense of urgency. The Army understood that if America entered the conflict, its soldiers would require unprecedented mobility. This wasn't merely about tanks and trucks, but about a machine capable of operating any time, anywhere, and under any condition. As Europe plunged deeper into chaos, this compact vehicle, born from impossible deadlines and intense corporate rivalry, was quietly preparing to redefine the very nature of the battlefield. The Germans, still supremely confident in the overwhelming might of their panzer divisions, remained utterly oblivious to how quickly a vehicle designed in less than 3 months would become their most profoundly underestimated adversary. The true genius of the Jeep lay not in brute force, but in its unparalleled speed and adaptability. At first glance, its design seemed almost absurd. Thin steel plating, an open top that exposed soldiers to both elements and enemy fire, and a seemingly fragile chassis when compared to formidable armored heavy. Yet, when tested under authentic combat conditions, this diminutive machine consistently exceeded all expectations. It could scale 60% grades, ford streams without stalling, and weave through dense forests, where larger trucks would inevitably become mired. Soldiers swiftly grasped that the Jeep's superficial vulnerabilities were, in fact, its greatest assets. It didn't attempt to conquer the terrain. Rather, it gracefully traversed it. From American and British training grounds, reports continuously poured in, highlighting the Jeep's unprecedented versatility. It could be roped onto ships, airdropped by parachute, or even strapped to gliders for airborne insertion. Mechanics discovered they could dismantle and reassemble its engine in the mud in less than 4 hours. Soldiers from farming backgrounds grinned at its straightforward simplicity, remarking that it reminded them of their sturdy home tractors. One private, in a confiscated diary, eloquently described it. "It's not a car, it's a mule." German intelligence initially dismissed these accounts as gross exaggerations. To them, the true measure of a war machine was its tonnage and the thickness of its armor. However, frontline German soldiers soon began to witness a deeply unsettling phenomenon. These jeeps were omnipresent. They zipped through shell craters, careened across minefields, and, with special wheels attached, even sped along railway tracks. While German supply convoys became hopelessly mired in mud, the jeeps whistled past, delivering critical intelligence, commanders, or urgent medical supplies, demonstrating a level of ubiquitous mobility that defied conventional military logic. Within Allied camps, numerous anecdotes abounded, highlighting the jeep's peculiar allure. There were tales of soldiers outfitting jeeps with mounted machine guns purely for mischievous escapades, pulling sleds through snowdrifts, or organizing impromptu races in bombed-out towns. One general, reportedly, reprimanded an officer for misusing equipment, only to sheepishly request a ride a few minutes later. The jeep's charm was undeniable. It possessed the uncanny ability to momentarily transform even the most hardened veterans back into boys. Yet, beneath this veneer of humor lay a deadly reality. The jeep was fast enough to appear abruptly and vanish before the enemy could effectively react. It enabled quicker artillery emplacement, steel tier, reconnaissance, and more rapid medical evacuations. Warfare itself was fundamentally shifting from static fronts to fluid maneuver, and the jeep stood squarely at the heart of this transformation. As generals on both sides began to grasp its profound importance, the initial laughter had long since dissipated. What had once seemed a mere toy was rapidly evolving into an indispensable strategic instrument, a weapon of speed in a protracted war of attrition. American factories quickly became the pulsating heart of the Jeep revolution. Once the design was finalized, the monumental challenge shifted from blueprints to mass production. Here, the unparalleled might of American industry was unleashed in full force. Assembly lines that had once churned out passenger cars and agricultural tractors were retooled virtually overnight. By 1942, the factories of Willys Overland and Ford operated day and night, with men and women working in shifts under the glaring lights, their hands stained black with grease and steel dust. The Jeep was no longer merely a prototype. It had transformed into an unstoppable torrent. The sheer statistics were astonishing. By the war's conclusion, over 640,000 Jeeps had been manufactured enough to equip an entire army, with thousands more reserved for training and reserves. At the peak of production, a new Jeep rolled off the assembly line every 2 minutes. Soldiers often joked that Jeeps seemed to sprout directly from the ground, appearing faster than German tanks could destroy them. Amidst the relentless pace of the factories, human touches emerged. Workers scribbled notes on dashboards, tucked Lucky Charms beneath seats, or even signed their names under the hoods before the vehicles were shipped out. A young woman in Detroit recalled embroidering her brother's initials onto a Jeep's canvas seat, hoping it might somehow find him overseas. Another worker, weary after a 16-hour shift, whispered that each Jeep felt like a letter we were sending to our boys on the front lines, knowing these messages would travel far. Upon completion, the manufactured Jeeps were stacked like children's toys in shipyards, awaiting transport to the distant theaters of Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. Dock workers marveled at their compact efficiency. 4 Jeeps could occupy the space typically required by a single truck. Upon arrival, they were swiftly unpacked, assembled, and pressed into combat within hours. For German generals, the sheer scale was deeply unsettling. They had anticipated America's industrial might would yield an abundance of aircraft and tanks. But this overwhelming torrent of Jeeps defied all logical prediction. Instead of a few thousand heavy vehicles, millions of lightweight machines saturated continents, effectively stitching together front lines with an unprecedented level of mobility. The war was rapidly becoming a contest of scale, and the Jeep proved that sometimes the most diminutive things, when produced in sufficient numbers, could eclipse even the grandest weaponry. As this relentless flood continued, the machine once derided as a toy transformed into a nightmarish vision for the enemy. Endless convoys of Jeeps, advancing their headlights, flickering like a river of stars, carrying not just soldiers but the heavy, inexorable weight of battlefield inevitability. The Jeep, however, was far more than a mere machine. It was an indispensable lifeline. Soldiers depended on it not only to transport commanders, but also to ferry ammunition, tow anti-tank guns, evacuate the wounded, and even deliver hot meals to shivering troops huddled in trenches. Its versatility was unparalleled. A single Jeep could function as an ambulance at dawn, a critical communication hub by noon, and a mobile firing platform by night. For the soldiers who rode in it, the Jeep became a trusted companion, demanding little yet giving everything. Anecdotes proliferated in diaries and letters. One medic vividly describes speeding along shell-pocked roads in his Jeep, saving 3 soldiers who would otherwise have bled to death. Another soldier quipped that the Jeep was as stubborn as a mule, but faster than any horse. In Italy, villagers remembered the distinctive sound of Jeeps rumbling into their liberated towns, lights flickering on and off, carrying blanket-trapped casualties. This unassuming machine became synonymous with presence wherever soldiers needed it. The Jeep was never far away. Beyond its purely practical utility, the Jeep carried an immeasurable emotional weight. It bolstered morale. Young American G's affectionately named their vehicles, adorned them with pinup art, or even festooned them with Christmas decorations during rare respites from combat. Rumors circulated of Jeeps being hastily converted into makeshift chapels, where chaplains delivered sermons to soldiers before battle. One officer vividly recalled a quiet night in Normandy. The gentle thrum of a Jeep engine idling, as soldiers gathered around it, singing as if the machine itself were an integral part of their ritual of survival. It fostered a unique bond, a sense of familiarity and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. For the Germans confronting it, this pervasive presence was deeply unsettling. Captured prisoners in North Africa recounted to their interrogators their profound shock at the American speed in moving troops and supplies. In their own words, "The battlefield seemed to move too quickly. The enemy appeared to multiply in every direction." For us, viewing this story decades later, a salient question arises. In the annals of war, what do we truly remember more? The colossal tanks that dominated headlines, or the seemingly ordinary machines that carried the very lifelines of existence? If you were a soldier, would you choose the steel-encased belly of a tank, or the open, vulnerable seat of a Jeep, feeling both the air and the danger? The Jeep compelled every soldier to ponder such questions, and time and again, the answer lay not in raw power, but in unwavering trust. By the war's midpoint, the German general's laughter had entirely faded, replaced by thin-lipped frustration. Reports from the front described an enemy vehicle that seemed to multiply infinitely, consistently outmaneuvering their convoys and undermining their meticulously constructed defenses. What unnerved them most was not its design, still often dismissed as crude, but its relentless ubiquity. The Jeep was everywhere, a phantom carrying orders, weapons, and personnel, moving faster than the Wehrmacht could possibly adapt. A captured German officer, confessing to his interrogators, admitted his utter inability to comprehend how such a small, unassuming vehicle could wreak such disproportionate havoc. In North Africa, the Jeeps swarmed across the desert like persistent insects, ferrying British commandos on daring raids against supply depots before vanishing back into the dunes. In Italy, they conquered rugged mountain trails that even mules struggled to navigate. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers, receiving thousands of Jeeps through the Lend-Lease Act, found them to be invaluable reconnaissance tools, perplexing German patrols with their sudden appearances deep behind enemy lines. Among captured German prisoners, anecdotal evidence, recorded in confiscated notes, revealed their growing despair. Sam Paintley wrote that the Americans possessed too many of these machines. Destroying one was pointless, for 5 more would inevitably appear. Others, displaying an unwilling admiration, likened a Jeep to a colony of ants. Small and vulnerable individually, yet collectively, an unstoppable force. Even the German generals who had once openly scoffed at the Jeep began to shift their tone. Field reports now described the Jeep as the enemy's all-purpose machine, a designation infused with both grudging respect and palpable fear. For commanders accustomed to the meticulous precision engineering and heavy armor of their own military hardware, the Jeep represented something alien efficiency achieved through sheer simplicity. Concurrently, Allied soldiers continuously discovered novel applications for their ubiquitous companion. The Jeep became a mobile radio station, a forward command post, and even a stable platform for mounting recoilless rifles. Its boundless adaptability rendered the battlefield profoundly unpredictable, an unsettling reality for the German high command. For us, Viewing this historical account decades later, the irony remains sharply poignant. Those who once derided the Jeep as laughable now found its relentless presence more terrifying than many a tank. It compels a reflection. What seemingly insignificant invention might quietly reshape the balance of power in our own era, long before we fully comprehend its impact? The laughter had long since vanished. In its place, a profound unease settled, and within that unease, a stark reality emerged. This was no mere toy. This was a rising tide. And it was overwhelming. When Allied forces finally surged into Europe, the Jeeps arrived not in dozens or thousands, but in an endless, surging river. On D-Day itself, as soldiers clawed their way up the harrowing beaches of Normandy, crates of Jeeps followed close behind. Within mere hours, they were unboxed, swiftly assembled, and roaring inland. Their agile tires churned through the mud and rubble where heavier tanks often became mired, offering a tangible promise to weary infantry that vital reinforcements were perpetually close at hand. In the ensuing weeks, this formidable tide of Jeeps swelled further. Convoys stretched 4 miles across the French countryside, their headlights twinkling like fireflies in the summer twilight. Civilians watched in stunned amazement as endless streams of Jeeps passed, carrying not only generals and radio operators, but also medics, cooks, chaplains, and even bands playing for the liberated towns. For many, this spectacle was even more striking than the sight of tanks, which had, after all, once rolled through France under German banners. But the Jeep, with its open design and incredible speed, felt fundamentally different. It wasn't an instrument of conquest. It was more akin to a living, unstoppable torrent of movement, carrying the spirit of liberation itself. Captured German prisoners spoke of their bewilderment. Some swore the Americans must harbor a magical factory hidden in every forest, capable of producing Jeeps overnight. A confiscated diary entry from a German sergeant simply, starkly read, "They arrived faster than we retreated." Within Allied ranks, light-hearted anecdotes also flourished. Soldiers would wager on how quickly a Jeep could be assembled from its shipping crate, with some reportedly completing the task in a mere 20 minutes. Others painted images of sweethearts or the names of their hometowns on the hoods, transforming each vehicle into a mobile memory of life beyond the war. In liberated Paris, jubilant crowds cheered not only the rumbling tanks, but also the swarms of Jeeps that followed. Young American G's waved from their open seats, their laughter echoing through streets that had long been silenced by fear. The relentless tide was, by then, truly unstoppable. By the winter of 1944, Europe was, in effect, stitched together by the ubiquitous presence of the Jeep. It seamlessly linked command posts with foxholes, villages with supply depots, and individual soldiers with their very survival. In modern warfare, distance was everything, and the Jeep had conquered it. In the final years of the war, the Jeep was no longer a curiosity. It had become an indelible symbol of the Allied advance. Those German officers who had once dismissed it with jokes now watched it pass through conquered cities as the unmistakable banner of inevitability. Wherever the Jeep appeared, resistance crumbled, not necessarily due to overwhelming firepower, but because of what the vehicle represented: an endless stream of supplies, an unparalleled reach, and an unstoppable momentum that simply wore down all opposition. This profound symbolism transcended the battlefield. American publications like Newsweek prominently featured images of Jeep convoys fording rivers, scaling mountains, and even carrying generals into newly liberated towns. Back home, families saw them as tangible proof that their sons were never truly alone, always accompanied by a small, resilient companion. In Europe, children liberated from years of occupation often vividly remembered the first soldiers in those open-top Jeeps, tossing out candy, distributing food, and smiling from behind their dusty goggles. To them, this machine carried more than just warriors. It carried the very essence of liberation. Among post-war survivors, a new set of anecdotes circulated. Veterans often recalled hearing the sound of victory in the Jeep's engine. A distinctive, persistent thrum, lighter than a truck's roar, yet continuous and utterly dependable. One former prisoner of war later confessed that this sound haunted him long after his captivity, for it invariably signaled the enemy's proximity, always moving faster than anticipated. Statistics underscore these poignant memories. Over 640,000 Jeeps were produced, shipped across oceans, and driven through deserts, jungles, mountains, and shattered cities. They served in every theater, every climate, and under every conceivable condition. Few weapons could boast such pervasive reach. Yet, the Jeep was never truly a weapon in itself. Instead, it was the resilient thread that wove the chaotic tapestry of war into a coherent whole, binding vast armies into an apparently unstoppable force. The German laughter had given way to silence, then to fear, and ultimately to surrender. When the war concluded, soldiers carried the Jeep, not just in their memories. Some even smuggled them onto ships, unwilling to part with a companion that had been both a tool for survival and a steadfast friend. The Jeep was more than a machine. It was a witness, a confidant, and an enduring reminder that sometimes the most diminutive things in history carry the greatest weight. The Jeep's story, far from concluding with a thunderous roar, persisted with a quiet, indomitable resilience. Long after the cessation of gunfire, this unassuming machine continued its journey, ferrying farmers across their fields, guiding explorers across vast deserts, and carrying rescuers into regions still healing from the scars of conflict. It outlasted the very war that birthed it, a testament to its enduring power, found not in destruction, but in steadfast service. Veterans often spoke of the Jeep with a tenderness usually reserved for loved ones, a sentiment more profound than that evoked by tanks or rifles. One veteran confessed that, even in his dreams, he could still hear the gentle nighttime click of its engine, a sound that resonated with safety, mobility, and sheer survival. Another vividly recalled how, after a mortar blast, the Jeep transported him to a field hospital, saving a leg that would almost certainly have been lost in any other war. These were not grand narratives of conquest, but rather the small, intimate moments where a machine became an inseparable part of the human story. In Europe, the children who had clambered onto Jeeps during liberation grew up to remember not merely the machine itself, but the faces it carried. Dust, Traig, soldiers distributing chocolate and bandages, or simply offering a cheerful smile after years of oppressive silence. For them, the Jeep was not a weapon. It was a potent symbol of life's return, an unmistakable sign that vitality and hope were once again flowing through their shattered streets. Perhaps, then, this is the ultimate irony. The Germans had scorned the Jeep for its perceived fragility, deeming it unfit for the gravitas of war. Yet, that very fragility, multiplied hundreds of thousands of times, transformed into an unstoppable force. The weakness they mocked transmuted into an indomitable toughness. The toy they disdained became the very face of liberation. Thus, the Jeep endures in our collective memory as both a vital tool and an intimate companion, a powerful reminder that history is not always forged by the loudest weapons or the most imposing machines. Sometimes, it is quietly, steadfastly shaped by the smallest things, moving forward with an unyielding purpose.